This episode is sponsored by Bigger City. Thank you so much for supporting us and helping our show to grow.
Hello and welcome to the Big Fat Gay Podcast, where we talk about the things that are weighing on our minds. I'm Trevor Keyson. I'm a super chip, and today I'm a holly jolly elf boy. It's the holiday season. Our tree is up. The lights are up. We just got to put some ornaments on it. And I'm ready I got my trio of hot cocos. And
he doesn't mean us.
Best three-way ever.
He does not mean us.
Just to be clear. Hi, my name is Michael Willer. I am a chubby chaser, and I suppose I'm a holly jolly Santa boy because I have grown quite a lot of white in my beard over the last few months.
Oh, yeah.
And it's starting to come in. It's happening. Daddy Michael. It's right around the corner.
Your daddy era.
Episode title. There we go.
Oh, dear.
Hey there, my name's Don. I'm a big chubby guy living here in sunny Hollywood. And this week, by the time this releases, I will be a happy, dandy San Francisco boy. I'll be traveling up to San Fran and haven't been there in, 8 years. So looking forward to it.
Not since you left your heart.
Oh, boy.
Hi, I'm Dan Oliverio, author, public speaker, and chubby chaser. And yes, I am the elf's assistant. I am the person putting up the tree, putting up the lights, putting up the ornaments.
You should have seen him running around earlier.
Do the whole episode like that.
Welcome to today's show, everybody. The first of two. We're recording in person, if you couldn't tell by our, once again, chaotic
Wait,
energy.
should we all hold hands again like I make us do sometimes?
Yes, like people can see.
I can't reach.
We're doing it, listener. We're doing it. Okay.
People can't even hear me.
Energy circle.
Yay.
Who's going to stop him from doing that?
I want to
Dan.
see you try and stop me. It's the holiday season, and we're at this time of year, we're especially grateful for our Patreon supporters, for Bigger City, for everyone who listens and thinks of us. It is decorate your home, light your hearth.
Did you say hearth?
Yes.
Is that how it's pronounced?
No.
Light your heart.
Hearth is how they take you to the funeral when you've got a speech
Hearth is
and feel mirth and merriment. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you Bigger City. Thank you Big Fig for having us as a
this is the time of year for donating to causes that you believe in. So find us on Patreon.
yes.
Excellent. Welcome
Yes.
to the show. Should we dive right in?
Oh well, hold on. And just a reminder that next week we are watching Genie, which is available to watch on Peacock.
Oh,
with
right.
With Melissa McCarthy. It's I'm excited to talk about it because it's a fun holiday watch.
Yeah. It's yes. We can't talk about it yet, but I've already seen it, and I'm also excited to talk about it.
Hit that button.
All right, let's do it.
We need some jazzy Christmas music for next week.
Okay.
Jazzy Christmas music.
Now,
I'm always picturing dancing ducks during that. I don't know why.
I think it's kind of sounds like
because it kind of sounds like quacking. Yeah.
Picture them with little top hats and canes.
What? Dan, get us on track. Harvey Guillén.
Oh, my goodness, Harvey Guillén.
He's in the media once again. What's he doing there?
He's quite the fashion icon. We cover Harvey Guillén's fashion more often than any other fashion icon.
We should.
Well, and I think it's because he has this. He's just always on board with fashion. Like he's just done this new spread in Irk magazine, that's IRK, and a photo shoot by Robert Ashcroft. And the title is Ghouls Just Want to Have Fun, which is a riff on his role in What We Do in the Shadows.
Yes.
So it is a really wonderful photo spread and interview with Mr. Guillén and all about like his sense of coming to style, his sense of like how they set up the photo shoot. And there's some really fun stuff in there. And also talking about how he moves in the clothes, which I think is really so important, especially for our audience. You know, because we often think of fashion as the opposite of comfort. Which if you're fat would be pants. You know, so he really talks about like having this jacket and having like he had these sequined pants, and he says they were so comfortable to move in. He says you wouldn't think that sequins would be comfortable, but they're lined, and he just glides in them.
I understand that focus too.
Oh,
because,
yeah.
like, I associate looking good with discomfort.
Absolutely.
And not just pants, even like shirts being restrictive or overly hot, made of bad materials.
I cannot wear a cotton poly blend because it'll burn up.
But no matter what you think of Harvey Guillén's look, he looks so comfortable in everything he wears. Like every single thing he wears.
He really does.
Looks like something I would be very comfortable in.
Well, I actually think I look at him, I look at what he's wearing. I'm like, oh my God, isn't that so uncomfortable? Because I'm imagining, because he wears a lot of fitted stuff, like what he wore to the Oscars, and a lot of this stuff is really high fashion fitted and not what you'd expect a fat person to be wearing to hide, but a fat person looking to showcase how beautiful they are.
But it's multiple layers with most of his stuff. He'll have one fitting thing, and then he has loose stuff over it that gives a certain flow.
Yes.
That's the part that speaks to comfort.
But in this spread, there is no, I mean, if there
are fewer layers.
There are fewer layers. And also like he's wearing this, he calls it a trench coat. I call it chiffon. It's
nothing underneath.
It's really diaphanous, and it's gorgeous, of course. Not just him, but the garment.
One thing I appreciated was that he sort of tells the story about how he got his big break in Hollywood, which was What We Do in the Shadows, and auditioning for it and kind of going all out. But I really like how he encapsulated it at the end, which is, I may have to condense this a little bit, but essentially he says, I've made a career out of being the wild card. If you look at my resume, I've made a whole career out of being a character not written for me, which in the case of his character in What We Do in the Shadows, is meant to be 25 years older.
Yeah.
Like, this, and so he just is able to, he says, because for a long time, all these things I was told, you're too short, you're too stout, you're too Latin, you're too queer. All the things that were considered strikes against me were also my strengths and not my weaknesses. That's what made me stand out. And
that's his career. That's his whole career.
That's his career in a nutshell. And being able to take that for that particular audition, he modeled his look. He went in with a look into the room after Guillermo del Toro.
I love that so much. And I love that
if I can just
finish the story.
If I can just catch up, the reason he did that is because the role was Guillermo, and he's like, what does a Guillermo look like?
Yeah.
And he found Guillermo del Toro's coffee table book.
Yes.
And so he patterned himself on the author photo.
And Guillermo del Toro is, if you're not familiar, is a writer-director who has this, he's adorable, but he has this kind of like older fat nerd look.
Yeah, definitely.
Like his hair is parted in the middle. He's got glasses. He's got a beard. And I kind of love that he went in with that.
Yeah. No, I just love seeing that, and that, I don't know, fat icons inspiring other fat icons.
And let's be upfront. Like, one of the reasons why we cover him so much is because of his uniqueness and embracing this stuff and putting himself out there by being himself.
Willingness to talk about it.
Yeah. There are a lot of other fat actors we talk about a lot, but we never talk about their clothing because they wear standard fat man clothing that makes them fade into the background very often.
Well, and talking about the experience of being fat in Hollywood, in his case, like a lot of fat people, I think, are just trying to do the thing that they're out to do and aren't necessarily trying to be activists. I mean, we came into this with Lizzo at the end of 2020, 2021, whenever it was. Time is a flat circle. We haven't brought that old gem back in a while. And so it's always something to celebrate when you see somebody actually doing that and talking about life as a fat person.
I also want to broaden this to the point about how he got the role was very accidental. This is how he got the role in. I mean, he'd had a long career sort of in the background and foreground at Disney because he was doing a lot of kids shows. He was doing a lot of, he was like that fat carrot. He was like the fat kid in the background in a lot of Disney shows. So he gets this big break. And how did he get this big break? He got it by serendipity and by accident. But here's what the takeaway that I have from it. He says he was in a period of his life when he was just saying yes to things. Like he made this sort of existential decision to, I'm just going to say yes.
Year of yes.
Yeah,
I've done it.
Yeah, year of
yes.
yes. Good thing. And so he was at a party, a very like intimate little gathering, and he gets a text the next day. You should really audition for this role. And he's like, excuse me, who is this? Like, he has no idea. And like a stranger said, so he calls his agent because he's in the year of saying yes, right? And so he's going to say yes to this audition. He doesn't know what it is. It's okay. And then he finds out, oh, it's a really important casting director. And that's when he does the whole thing of like, okay, I'm going to make this count. He does something he's never done, which is actually dress for the role. I'm not sure if that's what got him the role, but it's what made, I think it changed his energy, certainly.
Well, this is what he talks about with that character multiple times, is that the costume puts him in that character. Like, he can't help but be the character once the costume goes on. And the first experience of that was in that audition.
Yes.
He doesn't even remember what he did in the audition because he just, as he describes it, just became the character for 5 minutes. And
a lot of actors have that experience too because of the adrenaline level while auditioning. You just can't remember.
Yeah, but he echoes that transformation of what the clothing does to you in the photo shoot in Irk magazine. He talks about like how when I put this on, I just had to move that way. So it's a thing that a lot of actors talk about. It's why in the old days when theater had a lot more money, they would design down to the underwear because that's the thing that's on your skin.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I get that. Well, anyway, it's always fun to feature him.
Yeah.
It's always a positive story, put it that way. Like, we always like having his energy on the show.
I also love how he pushes back against talking about coming out is letting people in.
That is brilliant.
Yeah.
That is so brilliant. That it's not coming out, it's letting people in.
Which is,
I love that
exactly
perspective.
Right.
I love
exactly
that.
Right. All right. Well, next up, not quite as uplifting.
No,
still
but-
interesting.
I think it is. I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly positive. So the headline we're talking about in Screen Rant is the movie Love Actually director regrets controversial body shaming jokes in the 2003 Christmas movie. So Richard Curtis, did he write it? He's the director of the movie.
He's the writer too.
So, okay, yeah, writer-director of the famous,
It's
very
also
popular.
worth noticing, just as a quick aside, the movie we're watching next week, Genie, was also written by him.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, I didn't realize that either. Yeah, interesting. Well, that's a good connection there. He, his daughter, a few years ago, his daughter called him out on the fat shaming jokes in the movie, all aimed at a particular character that I've seen this movie and I don't really remember.
I don't remember these jokes.
I don't either.
And you would, I've
only seen it once.
I've never seen the movie, but so I immediately looked up the actor and like, I would never remotely think of her as the fat girl. Like she's just not Twiggy.
Martine McCutcheon's character, Natalie.
I think it's important, I think especially for our younger listeners, let's all go back in time to 2003.
Yes.
And
20 years ago.
I think just body culture was so different. And I was thinking about this
Completely
article
different world,
and talking, I don't remember who I was talking to, but kind of talking about like 2007 with Britney Spears at the VMAs. I
don't
forgot that.
I was so not plugged in at the time.
So it was Britney Spears. It was kind of when she was, in a mental health crisis. It was her kind of coming back at the VMAs, and she was criticized for how fat she looked during the performance, and so fat and so out of shape. And it's like she looked like a normal human being.
Yeah.
Right.
But it was just this. It was kind of like peak nightmare body culture. So 2003, I feel like is leading up to that, like when we reached peak insanity in body culture and analyzing women's bodies.
Another frame of reference, 2003 is only 2 years after Shallow Hal came out, and people thought that was a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, we've talked about Shallow Hal, which is
It's a mixed bag.
a mixed bag.
It's a
Like
mixed
it's
bag.
not all bad. It's certainly, I think, misguided, but I think ultimately tries to go the right directions.
But I feel like a lot of the whiffs that it makes are things that would be blatantly obvious now.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so anyway, this at the time, and this particular article does talk about Shallow Hal's context. The director says, "Look, I wasn't observant about it. I missed it, and I regret it."
Well, and I think that's the right way to put it. I wasn't observant. Why? Because the entire culture wasn't observant.
Yeah, it's hard to hold. And I think the article does a pretty good job of kind of underlining that there are good qualities to old movies that are sort of their time, even though they have bad things in them, or at least harmful things in them that you could watch and be slimed by. And then there are plenty of older movies that are just plain terrible and should be avoided for having no redeemable qualities whatsoever. And this isn't necessarily one of those movies. Whether or not you like romantic comedies is a different story.
Yeah, I'm out. So
I mean, I think it's like, I don't want to be like, it's fine, but I think it's important for these things to kind of exist in pop culture and to give a window into like, this is what the world was like at the time. And this is what was, people thought was okay to do.
It's kind of like signposts on our evolution.
Yeah, especially when the key creative of that project comes back and says, I was wrong. I'm sorry, I was wrong.
Yeah,
that's
and it's really important.
Yeah, like he didn't have to do that.
No, he could have just shut up.
Yeah.
The other thing too, you talk about signposts on the road. It's also so important for context because it's so easy, especially in any sort of activism, to get caught up in like, nothing's changed. It's all for naught. It's just as we're talking about the same things that we were 40 years ago.
It really can feel that way sometimes.
And while there's a lot of truth to that, it's never exactly the same.
That's a really good point.
Something is different now. It's almost like we haven't gone in a circle. We've gone in sort of a helix. So we may be in the same point in two dimensions, but not the third.
It's interesting. Now I'm actually kind of wondering, like, I haven't seen Shallow Hal since it was in theaters.
Yeah.
Like, I'm wondering if I rewatched it now, how would I?
I mean, should we do that?
I don't think.
Should we do another thinner episode? And
you know what? We're going to put out
for Halloween.
We're going to put out a question at the end of the episode to our listeners. Would they like a Shallow Hal episode? And if we get enough responses for it, we'll consider it.
Sure.
I'm on board.
I mean,
that.
I think should we do the worst Valentine's Day episode ever?
No, because I think there's a lot wrong with Shallow Hal, but its intention, I think, was positive.
Well, and certainly talking about the actress who played the body double, like the experience on set was great.
Yeah.
Like, so the environment that the movie was made in didn't seem to be.
And I actually know, I think I know one of the extras who was in it, and she was like, I liked the movie. And she's fat. And she's like, I'm sorry, I liked the movie. Of course, I don't say that in public.
Well, again, like if you watched it at the time, right? Like I remember for the first, like I had lots of issues with the movie. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it was the first time I felt like a movie had gone out of the way to make the statement, you are human.
Yeah.
We see you as a human being.
Which at the time was radical.
Yeah, it was really radical at the time. So
I don't know. I am always apprehensive because like I remember going back to rewatch the Austin Powers movies and like knowing everything about Fat Bastard. I'm like, okay, that's going to be really bad. And it's like, wow, this is somehow worse than I remember. And I remember it being really, really, really bad.
I think the reason is that, when you first watched it, you just cringed. When you rewatched it, you knew why you were cringing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, dear listener, if you have any thoughts on Love Actually and those scenes that we're discussing here that none of us can remember, feel free to write in.
Yeah, I'm curious how bad they actually are. I'm sure I'll end up rewatching it because Michael loves them.
But in the meantime,
yes.
Do you hear it approaching?
I do.
Eagle, I summon you! Fat Watch 2023!
I need that energy, Don. Can I have some, please?
Well, it's available now for $9.95 on
I
contest.
said 6 pieces of chocolate. That was all the gas I had in the tank for that.
I'm feeling a little like a nervous mouse in a field. That quick shift from thinking about Shallow Hal and Austin Powers to Fat Watch, which it's a good vibe. I like this piece. It's sweet. It's simple. It's a piece in the New York Times talking about bellies.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sort of sweet in a way.
It is. So it's a woman in the New York Times writing about, this is what my belly looks like.
Amelia Tate.
Yeah. And how she starts it with an anecdote about basically getting accused of being pregnant while in a foreign country. Like, oh, when are you expecting? And like the tour guide keeps
doubled down.
Yeah, it's like, no, what? No, oh, you don't understand the question. When are you? How long have you been pregnant? It's like really, and she keeps she says 15 times. No.
Honestly, that's probably a question best to avoid in any situation.
I feel like even if I see a woman, with her doing the back arch, pregnant lady walking.
Currently passing another human being between her legs in that moment.
Never ask that question.
It's cultural. There are a lot of cultures where that is not intrusive. It is caring.
Yeah.
And anyway, moving on. But the point is, she talks about how we've lost touch with what bellies actually look like.
Yeah.
That there's just this, it's supposed to look like this superhero Marvel movie
Washboard
version.
abs.
Yeah, or defective.
I really liked the hypothetical she created where like, what if, some aliens came down to Earth to try and discover, what abdominal body types stood out the most. And she, if you lined up a whole bunch of people, it would be the people with the washboard abs that
As
would
the
stand
freaks.
out as unusual.
Yeah,
as
as the
different.
You might look at it as a disability, like, oh, you're missing a part of your body. Are you okay?
Yeah. And essentially the entire article is just a really like easy to the point breakdown of this is normal. This is just normal.
They also pointed out something I've never heard discussed directly in one of these articles when they're talking about in the search for plus size models. A lot of these companies are looking for a hypothetical body type that doesn't exist, which is a hourglass figure with washboard abs.
Well, or no
Flat.
belly.
Yeah.
No belly.
No
flat.
belly.
Yeah, she has to. They have to be plus size to a degree, but they're not allowed to have a belly.
Yeah, that's just not the way. Like, you would have to have it surgically removed.
Which
That's the only way.
is why I think you have a lot of plus size female models who are like, size 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because after that, they start showing a more visible belly, and they have to, and they can't airbrush it
Which
out.
is so weird because, like, if I'm buying clothes, I need to know what it's going to look like on me.
Well, and I think that's the thing. Because there are no clothes made for that body,
Yeah.
we can't use that body to model it.
Yeah.
And therefore, we can't use those models.
There was a post that I can't remember what company, what the clothing brand was, but it went viral because they used, some plus size women's clothing, and they used an apple shaped woman to model the skinny jeans. So it was, a woman with a large belly with, kind of high waist jeans and, more like skinnier legs, not the traditional like pear shape you would see to model those jeans.
Okay.
And all these women so excited to see like, oh my God, this is what it'll actually look like on me.
Yes.
Like I know what it'll look like because of the model they chose for this. And how there are so many women with bodies like this that don't get to see how clothes would look like on them.
Yeah.
I really wonder how many people out there, like what the percentage of people out there is that don't see themselves like in that kind of advertising. That like, do they just don't like,
I would suspect it's probably 80% or higher.
yeah, like huge numbers. Anyway, this is a really uplifting New York Times article. It's a good little holiday cheer as you grow, if you get your holiday belly going on. Just know it's normal.
Your belly, like a big bowl of jelly, is worthy and perfect and ready for the season. I don't really know how we transition.
I don't know
Speaking
either.
of the season, since it's now Christmas time, and this is the season where we have to start listening about the war against Christmas. Let's talk about the origins of the war against Christmas.
What?
The first people to cancel Christmas canceled it because of fears of gluttony.
Oh,
Literally, that was the reason why Christians and the Puritans tried to ban Christmas, was the fear that gluttony would be inspired by these feasts and the drinking and all that stuff.
interesting.
So as we move into the Christmas season, we got this awesome letter about gluttony from one of our listeners.
It is one of our best letters.
This is a great letter, and Dan is going to deliver it with enormous gravitas.
Whoa. Calm
We
down.
need the music.
We do. There's a procedure here.
Well, so our listener writes, I have a few questions for you. But actually, no, before we get to that, there's a huge preamble. So the topic is Dante's Inferno, the poetic work by Dante Alighieri. I am curious, says our writer, I'm curious what you all think about the situation, which I thought quite niche, and I'm sure plays out in other classrooms under different circumstances. I'm a PhD candidate in the humanities in a large public university in the US, and I'm currently the grader for a course on Dante's Inferno, the first part of the Divine Comedy trilogy. In the trilogy, Dante, the poet, narrates Dante, the character, through a hell and purgatory and heaven, constructing a landscape where some sins are punished via the contrapasso, which is a punishment that resembles the sin. Some pay for their sins in purgatory and some reach paradise. Early in Inferno, that's the work, those guilty of the sin of gluttony suffer under a relentless rain while lying flat in a waterlogged putrid terrain. Although the sin is gluttony, fatness in no way is prominent among the sinners. In fact, they're barely described at all. So as a homework assignment, the professor asked students to place a contemporary figure in one of the circles of Inferno they discussed so far and explain their choice. While many students chose sins other than gluttony, some put political and corporate leaders in the greed circle, others placed characters like Blair from Gossip Girl in lust, some did condemn contemporary characters for their gluttony. Some of the posts emphasized characters who overconsume in a general way, but there were very few descriptive posts focused on fat. One student included a gif of Homer from The Simpsons being force-fed donuts by the devil, citing Homer's, quote, abusive tendencies towards eating, unquote, while another placed Mac from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. The student described how Mac gained 70 pounds one season only to become shredded later and has, quote, an unhealthy relationship with food. The post suggests that the character redeems himself once he gets shredded in a future season, though he does concede that at a point he might be guilty of vanity. These examples do at least two things. They posit fatness as the result of gluttony, something Inferno does not explicitly indicate, and link fatness with a lack of health. One of the students' posts directly solicited other students' input re-Homer, though there were no responses. As a fat man and a gainer happy with his body, I found the gif amusing, but I'm opposed to the conflation in the posts between fatness and unhealthy tendencies, as I imagine you have too, listening to the pod since the beginning. I'm also concerned by the effect the discussion board might have on students who might have body image issues or be particularly sensitive to shame in relation to eating. So I have a few questions for you. What do you think of the posts? Admitting that I haven't included the entirety of the post, do you find the student's post objectionable? If so, would you have intervened in the discussion if you were the professor? Assuming you find at least some of the posts objectionable, would you consider modifying the activity in future and feature different portions of the Inferno? If you think the assignment and posts were fine, what factors into that conclusion? And lastly, do you think it's necessary to do anything different at all? Or should students in a class about hell sort of expect to encounter unpleasant things like this? Loving hearing you discuss all the listener letters and hope this isn't too long or niche a topic. Thanks for all the work you do on behalf of fat people and those who love them.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yes.
Can I just interject real quick before we actually dive into this? The reactions that this letter got from the four of us were hilarious. We are the nerdiest podcast ever. Like, you should have seen the feed just light up, and then we're like, "I have something to say. I have something to say. I'm ready.
Save
I'm ready.
it for the podcast. Save it for the podcast. That's our rallying cry when we're really excited about a topic and we want to talk about it, but we have to wait. So my suggestion, and you guys can chime in one way or the other, is that we answer these in order just to keep it orderly.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Does that make sense?
That's fine.
Okay, so first question, what do you think of the posts, the student posts?
I have my response.
Okay, well, Dan, you've got one locked and loaded.
Completely expected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is in this day and age, conflating quote unquote obesity with gluttony, with unhealth, with basically obesity and we've talked about this many times on the podcast, fatness is conflated with all other sins.
I mean, it's the first thought that comes to mind when you say the word gluttony is fatness and consumption.
Well, but not just that. All the other sins are subsumed in it because fat people are slothful. Fat people are evil. Fat people are greedy. Fat people are like, you can take any of the seven and you can fold them all into gluttony, at least according to our modern media.
Right. I would tend to agree. I think, do I find them objectionable? I mean, yes, in that I wouldn't want to encounter that myself, but no, only in the sense that this was invited.
Yeah.
And this is a classroom setting, right? So you can't learn if you don't put out the ideas that you need to discuss, So
taking that as an example to have a teaching moment.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the thing is like as a teacher, we're no longer talking. Dan has experience with this. We're no longer talking about discussion in terms of like our podcast where we're all just positing opinions. We're talking about education and handling a student's learning of a subject, which is now starting to get stickier because the students are putting their own baggage into that subject. So,
which they do anyway, but this assignment not only invites that, but mandates it.
But if you don't look at your baggage when you're discussing the subject of baggage, then you're not going to learn anything about your baggage.
My baggage has baggage.
I think this is such a surface level, I think those are such surface level gluttony, perfect examples. So like, I'm not offended because I feel like it's just what
It's very
like,
expected.
It's expected. I mean, it's like the Simpsons thing is like literally Homer being punished for his gluttony when he goes to hell. Like that's.
I think so. For me, I think the danger with yes, it's very expected. I'm not shocked in the slightest. I don't think anyone in the room probably was, but it does perpetrate the idea that every single fat person is inherently a sinner.
Yes.
Yes.
And that I think is a dangerous idea.
Well, that's implicit in our modern culture.
Right. Exactly.
Well, it's again partially because it never applies to you, right? It's very easy to brand someone else a sinner for what you can see on them. But if we're going to discuss my situation, mine is much more specific to me and is very excusable.
Or worse, you crucify yourself as much as you do anyone
Yes.
else, or worse.
Yes.
And then I feel like the sort of lashing out at other fat people, like that's where you get a lot of that fat on fat crime.
Yes, yes, yeah.
No,
Like-
100%.
Yeah, which is insidious.
Well, and as the writer points out from the poster, the atonement, right? Because that's where we get the myth of the good fatty, right? The good fatty is atoning for their sin.
Right.
But
right.
here's something that I found very interesting. As part of my research for the bit, I went into research of the 7 heavenly virtues, right? The opposite of gluttony is not abstinence from food. The word is temperance that we use. The word temperance does not specifically apply to food in anyone's mind.
Nope.
It can be. That's one of the things that falls under this umbrella. But temperance specifically refers to alcohol in general. That's usually
Well,
the thing it's referred to.
in the 19th century, yeah.
But also the origins of gluttony.
Well, that's what I was curious about. Yeah.
Okay, so the origins of gluttony, it was not a sin. There were no original 7 deadly sins. That's not what they were intended to be. The 7 deadly sins started off as the 8 dangerous thoughts. It was created by a monk as advice for other monks to better experience God in your life. These are behaviors you should avoid.
No, thoughts you were better avoid.
Yes, thoughts.
And that's
right?
really important.
Or behaviors.
And that's really important in
It's both.
Christianity if
Yeah.
we talk about the credo and things like that.
Yeah, the thought as a sin is a big part of it. Gluttony had nothing to do with food. It did.
Yeah.
But it was primarily the overconsumption of anything to the point of obsession.
Right.
Right. Your mind is supposed to be clear to be thinking about God all the time. You can't do that if you're always thinking about
Well, that
lunch.
sounds
or
a
what you're
little
eating later.
gluttonous to me.
You're supposed to clear room on your plate for God.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
Yeah. So the concept of gluttony changed over time to focus more on food. But the fact that we still think of its opposite not as fasting, but as don't drink to excess tells you really how important it is as a sin.
well, and that's where I think, the next part of that question is how would you intervene as a
Right.
professor? And I think I would kind of posit that and be like, what do you think of other kind of gluttonous behavior that is not centered on eating or drinking? Like, I feel like Carrie Bradshaw with, how like her consumption of shoes and fashion stuff, like, would you put Carrie Bradshaw in?
Or even just starting with, do you think gluttony is only about food?
Right.
Just the really basic root of the problem, which is that most people conflate. Or at least assume that gluttony is just about food.
Well, and this is where healthism enters, because the counter argument that I can hear ringing down the halls in the background is, well, overconsumption of shoes isn't unhealthy like gluttony. So that's why it's not gluttony.
Easily refuted by showing them the price of shoes.
Well,
There's the whole episode where Carrie has literally, shooed herself out of being able to buy her apartment because, she just like
Yes,
all of her consumption goes
think-
to
but
shoes.
but the idea of health as a bodily institution, as the body as temple,
I think you could
But
go,
there's also-
that
you
is
could
that
go
is
the
a huge
direction
thing.
of drinking alcohol as gluttonous. That wouldn't, I mean, I guess maybe
As its
people,
original intent was.
Well, and there's a very good reason because of that we separate drugs, food, and alcohol. Like
'Cause-
we don't think of alcohol as a drug. We talk about drugs and alcohol. We
Right.
talk about food and drink.
Like one of the interesting things that the pushback against gluttony, when people actively started trying to stop thinking of gluttony as being a food related sin, was the sort of the royal French period of Versailles, when culinary art started elevating to the point where small portions of exquisitely prepared food became the norm. then gluttony started changing its shape, right? Because again, the original definitions of gluttony, it wasn't just overeating. It was eating at the wrong time. It was being overly fussy about your food, requiring your food to be a specific thing, right? Like that was gluttony, not just eating an extra piece of pizza. You know, it's interesting.
Well, and it's such a rich person problem.
Yeah.
You know,
So-
if you can barely survive on the food you're given, gluttony is probably not your sin.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate. I have a rim shot in here somewhere, but I won't do it. As a student, I would probably then respond, well, do you think overeating isn't gluttony?
Right.
And I think that if I were a student not willing to listen, that's probably the route I would go, and I wouldn't change my.
I think I have,
Which is a legitimate question.
but I also have to push the question is when does it become overeating? Like at which bite am I now consigned to hell for this
Don,
capital sin?
you're already fat,
for the
so you're
capital
already
sin of gluttony. This is a capital sin.
Yeah,
Right.
Deadly. It's
If I
deadly.
finish the pizza slice, do I go to hell or do I need to eat a second one?
No, you just got to leave the crust.
And if I eat 2 slices
what
of
makes you
pizza
fat.
and gain a pound, but Dan eats 3 and doesn't, is he a sinner because he has committed the act of gluttony, or is it simply the physical
Yeah.
existence of my body that is sinful?
That I think is exactly. How
I
to
think, Don,
answer
they
that.
consider that original sin.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect way to answer it.
Yeah.
So the next question in the series is, assuming you find something objectionable, would you consider modifying the activity
I have
to
a lot
feature
to say
different
about this.
portions of the Inferno? Or if, we don't find it objectionable, why?
So much to say.
So I know I think this is a more interesting assignment just because otherwise, it ends up being the like, well, Homer goes to gluttony because, and Mr. Burns goes to, greed.
Yeah.
I would say, give examples of people who, fit these sins outside of the way we normally think
Yeah.
of each sin.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I don't know. I'm
Let me
sending
use,
Carrie
He's
Bradshaw
on Sex
to
and the
hell.
City.
let me use Elon
Shoot.
Musk as an example. A man who has the world's fortune at his fingertips and decides to spend billions of it so that he personally can go into space, as opposed to solving the world hunger problem, as someone pointed out, the $3 billion he spent.
I like
could
that.
have
And
done.
which sin would you assign to that?
Gluttony.
Oh, all right.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, no, it's because it's all for me. I get to do whatever I want with it. Screw you, hungry people.
Well, and my question is, I'm not sure I could, without a lot of thought and fumfering, distinguish between gluttony and greed.
I mean, it's a longer debate.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I see them as being very similar. Right?
Yeah, but clearly the ancients or whomever wrote this see them as distinct. And I'm just curious why or how. And maybe that's a question for a classical scholar.
Gwyneth Paltrow for gluttony.
Oh, that's so good.
Interesting.
Because of her finicky.
Because
Because
of
it
good.
is all this, it is this ridiculous consumption to not consume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is gluttony. It is gluttonous
It's-
non-consumption.
Right. It's that choosiness. It's that I'm only like, it is gluttonous, I think, to be so particular about what you eat that you're rejecting all other forms of food. Like,
That is literally one of the definitions
yeah.
of gluttony.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So-
So, as an over-focus or over-attention to.
Over finickiness.
Over-finickiness.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if to alter the assignment slightly, and this isn't even the assignment, this is just the way you present the assignment. Would it be helpful to, and maybe they do this, I don't know, but to start with, we're examining a work of its time, kind of like what we said earlier about the movie, and that essentially like we're going into this period, into this mindset, into this work, and we're going to work within that. That doesn't necessarily mean, for instance, that the 7 deadly sins are factual things that we all must accept as the truth about life and society, and therefore fat people are gluttonous. Like, we don't have to then believe these things in order to study them.
Yeah. So this kind of gets to my point, having taught at various universities. When you're constructing a course, when you're constructing a syllabus, and you have this idea for the assignment like this, you have to keep going back. There are 2 things. Number 1, you have to think about what is it I'm trying to teach with this exercise? And the other is, what am I going to do when this goes off the rails? Because I promise you, both questions need to be considered. I've certainly had that experience where I've set up an exercise in class and it did not go where I thought it would go. because they're, it's human beings. I mean, anybody who's played D&D has this experience as the dungeon master.
We
You're like,
have
nope, that's not where it's supposed to go.
No idea what you're talking about, Dan.
So, you have to sort of build that in. And so the first question I would say, and I don't know which question this answers, or maybe it's all the questions. The first thing that I would say, like if I'm designing this course, I'm like, okay, what is my focus? Why am I even teaching this? Like, what is my focus? What do I, it's part of your lesson objectives or part of your course objectives. What do you want people to come away with if you are teaching Dante's Divine Comedy? What are you teaching? Because you could turn the whole thing into a poetry class if you wanted to. You don't have to deal with any of this. You could just be about poetry and meter and Italian language and historical linguistics. You could do a whole course on just that. Or you could talk about, is this a course in comparative morality? Or is this a course in early Christian thought? Or is this what is your course about? Or what component of all that does this figure into?
That's a really good. Sorry.
So that's the first thing. Is like, what am I even trying to teach? Now, the second thing is, as I said, you've got this idea of I'm going to have the students, and this is very popular. It's very modern in the history of teaching. Like, how do my students relate to the subject? And I'll have them bring in contemporary references, which is usually a terrible idea because students are really super lazy about that. They come up with Gluttony, Homer, done. That's really as far as they take it. So then the clever professor would then take that. You take this discussion, right, that is on the boards. You have to discuss that in class because now you get the gold. Now you talk about, as you brought up, Don, like what did gluttony mean? What does gluttony mean? Are you equating gluttony with immorality or is it just a bad suggestion? And you really, this is where the gold is when you start to get under it. And the problem is, and I can assure you, having taught, you don't have time for this discussion. You might have time to assign it as an essay, then you got to grade it. It is. You could spend a week just on this assignment.
So I'm very curious what did happen because this is all past tense. Like this all happened already. And for my money, it does come down to a question of like, what is the purpose of the course?
Right.
Like, because if the purpose of the course is to generate discussion about your own prejudices,
there you go.
I think that'll be fascinating. Yeah.
But it's important, are we discussing modern morality or early Christian thought when you get into that conversation?
Absolutely.
Because if you're explaining Christian thought to me and I'm interpreting it as you're telling me that's what morality should be, then we're going to have
that's a different.
Everybody, like common sense, everybody thinks morality is synchronous. Like morality is whatever I think right now.
It's also one of those things where like the 7 deadly sins mostly are not sins. They literally are behavior suggestions. And like, that's it. Like eating is not a sin. Even the Bible doesn't say it is.
So I think the last question is interesting about, because we've talked about kind of doing things differently, but should students in a class about hell expect to encounter unpleasant things like this? And I think it is, but I think how would you kind of like in the course description and kind of like content warnings about the class phrase this? Because I think it's so interesting because I think there's an unpredictability to what baggage people are going to be bringing into the class.
Yeah. Well, that's where you get into what Dan was saying, where like when you ask a student to walk in with, modern examples, they're going to follow their own prejudice. That's just how it's going to go.
If your purpose in the assignment is to drive up prejudices, this is a great way to start there.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. But I think Trevor's point is, is there a warning? And I think there might be a way to do that in the course description. I don't think most professors would bother with it, but you could say something like, we're going to examine visions of hell as expressed in Dante's Inferno. That might give a clue, but most people, I don't think that's enough. I don't think people understand. And it's why the humanities are so underprized. Is because people think of, classics as those old people who wrote silly ideas over there. They have no conception of how ongoing this is within the human condition.
I think what I would say, like if I was writing the course description, what do you say? Depictions of hell, something
as expressed in Dante's
Inferno, and how they shaped our personal and cultural biases today.
Or how they compare and contrast with.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I was pointing at, where like you don't have to say, this is truth. This is a work, and we can examine it and compare it to how we carry it.
Yeah, but that's actually going to be a big fight in the classroom, I can assure you.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure the professor is walking in with, this is a piece of literature, let's examine it. And you're going to have a bunch of students who are like, well, no, this is expressing the truth, except for this part that gets it wrong.
Yeah.
That is very much what's going to happen.
But I think a good teacher is going to have to set that framework for the conversation outside of the material.
Absolutely.
You know?
And I've done it many times.
But to answer the question the guy's saying, I don't think that you can conceivably discuss the concept of hell without discussing the concept of sin, discussing the concept of pain, punishment, and all that stuff.
Of course.
So I don't see how you could avoid some of these conversations.
No, but what I think Trevor's pointing to...
And I don't think you should.
No, but I think what Trevor's pointing to is, or at least what I'm pointing to and what Trevor says, is that people do not realize how personal this will get.
Yeah.
Right.
That is very true.
So here's an additional question that the writer didn't ask us, but I'm curious what you guys think. You know, the listener writer is grading the course. Yes. They're not teaching the course.
Yes.
There's a professor who's teaching the course and created this assignment. So what can the listener do, if anything, to enact whatever kind of change it is we think they should enact?
Oh, I have several suggestions.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, again, I've been in this situation, right?
Yeah.
Not so much as a grader, but as being a professor, like knowing that relationship of professor to grader to TA and things like that. So, and again, the writer did not ask for these suggestions. So I'm just putting that out there right now. Like this is giving advice for someone who never asked for advice. But one thing that could be done is just kind of drop it into the professor's ear, because the professor may be only cursorily aware of this or not really care, because there are so many other things going on at a higher level in the course that have to be gotten to, that have to be discussed. There's lecture planning. There's what slides am I going to use? There's a lot of that. So it may not have even come up in the professor's consciousness or as a matter of importance. So the first thing is to sort of alert. The second is to then why is this important? And see if there's an opening for that. And the third is, and this is kind of up to the professor and maybe could be made an offer by the grader, is there an opportunity here for the PhD student who probably will become a professor in the future? Is there an opportunity to have the TA in this case maybe run that part of the class discussion, which the professor may be either unqualified for, just as let's say a thin cis het male, never considered a lot of questions.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And or just the idea of it might make it interesting to have a guest speaker to come in and say, here's what I thought, and here's what I thought of some responses. It gives the TA a little more autonomy. It depends on whether the professor can spare the class time, because I'm sure this was not budgeted for, and a 10-minute discussion ain't going to cut it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it is a considerable use of class time. However, some professors might look on this as hey, great, you want to take the class for an hour? You go.
I would, I would love to hear back from this listener writer, because one thing that will really, and maybe if we do, a follow-up mailbag, that would be great. Because one thing we really need to know, I think, to properly answer is, what is the purpose of the class? What is the goal, and maybe even more specifically, what is the goal of this assignment?
And God, it's possible if you have some old timey professor, maybe tenured, although that's rare these days. They may not have clear course objectives.
Yeah,
it's we talk about the Inferno, and I say what I feel like saying.
Okay, and that could be it too. I'm just curious because I think we could whittle down all of this discussion to a really clear response. Anyway. Any final thoughts on Dante's Inferno?
It's a hot topic.
Yeah.
Then there we go. We've had two rough puns. No tip today.
Nope.
Happy holidays. That's our tip today.
Yeah. Enjoy
Done.
yourselves. All right.
Take us into Bit World.
So since we dove into gluttony today, I figured we'd do a little dive into the history of the 7 deadly sins and gluttony specifically.
Okay.
So what we now call the 7 deadly sins were actually started out as the 8 evil thoughts, written down in the 4th century by a Christian monk, Evagrius Ponticus, who was really just giving advice to other monks on what he thought were good ways to try and order your thoughts and your behavior to try and help you approach godliness.
In case you're wondering how we know it's only for other monks, it's because that's the only people who could read in the 4th century.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, though, it was the 8 evil thoughts that eventually became the 7 deadly sins.
Okay.
Including on that list of 8 was gluttony, lust, greed, wrath, sloth, vanity, and pride. But what was the 8th deadly thought that we dropped when they became the 7 deadly sins? 1, disobedience. 2, sadness.
What?
3, lying. Or 4, blindness or deafness.
Interesting.
Blindness or deafness in a literal sense?
In a literal sense, being unable to see or hear.
Weird. I'm going to say, I think lying. I think deception. How can you be true to yourself and to God if you're lying to people?
And I don't think that's covered by any of the others, is it?
It doesn't seem to be. I don't think.
I'm also
Or maybe it's all of the above, and it's actually the 11 deadly sins.
No, I'm inclined to go with disobedience or lying.
I'm going to say lying.
We got 1 for lying. We got 2 for lying.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with lying just because.
I mean, keep it even.
Well,
Like,
and
keep the
Trevor,
points.
Trevor has told me many stories of his growing up in Catholic school
Oh, boy.
and his family's Catholic bent. And there's a lot about lying.
Okay.
Catholicism.
We're all in for the lying, but in fact, the
Disobedience?
correct answer is sadness.
Sadness.
You cannot serve God if you are sad or unhappy.
Well, I'll just lie and say I'm happy.
Apparently that's allowed.
I mean, lie about all of them. These are thoughts at this point, right? You could just, if lying isn't one of them, you could just lie.
Well, maybe that's why lying isn't one of them, because you can't lie in a thought.
Oh, interesting.
That's true.
These are internalized. These
Yeah.
aren't about telling other people.
It's not, it's
That's where the 7 deadly sins comes from. Then it's talking to other people.
right. And when you think about it, there are a lot of silent orders. So,
Oh, yeah.
monastic orders.
Right. So you're literally just not lying.
You're never lying because you're
can't
never speaking.
Okay.
Interesting.
The much less talked about 7 heavenly virtues each represent the opposite of the 7 deadly sins. Today we call the opposite of gluttony temperance, which isn't really especially food-oriented, which actually underlines the fact that people didn't really think of gluttony as an overeating thing. Originally, though, temperance was called fast, as in fasting.
Yes.
And boy, did some of these saints love to be seen not eating. Saint Romuald of Ravenna, Italy, was a very good example of the idea of fast as a virtue. Which of these is an example of his legendary temperance back in 1000 AD? 1. He would wander the countryside smelling out good meals and then stare longingly at the food until the owner shared it. 2. He would order ornate meals prepared, smell them, exclaim how much he wanted to eat them, and then send them back to the kitchen uneaten. 3. He would eat the same food as his donkey while on his pilgrimages. Or 4. He starved himself to death while praying for rain.
Oh.
I'm
That
inclined to go with
sounds.
donkey or starving.
But the donkey may have eaten really well.
But did they have?
The donkey died of gout.
They had sainthood back then, right?
Yes.
So I feel like if he had died, they would have made him a saint, wouldn't they?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
You could perform miracles, not die, and then get sainted decades later. There wasn't
I
a
think
time limit.
eating the same as his donkey.
Okay, we got 1 for donkey eating.
I'm going to say
Well, not
That's not what he said, Don.
I'm going to also go with donkey.
All right,
Donkey.
we got 2 for donkey eating.
See, wisdom tells me I should just agree with Trevor.
Well, we were all wrong last time.
Yes, but I could have been lying.
Curses! Curses!
Never know the truth.
I kind of like the idea that he starved himself to death praying for rain. I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
I just picture like he dies and then it starts raining.
It's a miracle.
Well, in fact, the answer is he would order ornate meals, smell them, exclaim how much he wanted to eat them, and send them back to the
Sell them
kitchen.
a beach.
Boo.
I'm sorry, Dan, but that's so performative.
And that's the worst.
Yeah, God, what a performance. I mean, just did he do it on his own, or did he have to make sure people were watching?
Oh, I had people watching.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That's
he
why he
had
did it in
watching.
restaurants
He
and
had
not with his own food.
He had servants doing it.
Right.
Yes.
All right.
Jeez.
All right. Final question of the day. Over the centuries, gluttony has actually waxed and waned in the Roman Catholic Church's list of no-nos. In 2003, a petition was presented to Pope John Paul II to remove gluttony as a capital sin. The central argument that the act of eating could not be sinful was what? 1. If man does not consume all that God has given, then man shows disrespect to God.
Oh, I like that.
2. If eating is part of God's order, then not to eat is sinful. 3. God makes us eat and then makes the food taste good to show us that we should eat it. Or 4, the petition was a promotion for McDonald's new McGriddle sandwiches.
Oh my God. The first one feels the most plausible.
Mr. Pope, you think about eating a whole pizza.
You don't do it, but you think
I'm
about
sorry,
it.
so which one is the reason?
Which one is the reason? Was the central argument.
I'm going with number 1.
Yeah, same.
Yes.
Number 1, if
Number
man does
one.
not consume all that God has given, then man shows disrespect to God.
Yeah.
All 3 of you?
Yes.
Is that too logical? That might be too logical. What is it?
It is, in fact, God makes us eat and then makes the food taste good to show us we should eat it.
See, the problem with that argument, though, is that once you could say, well, the reason that gay sex is so necessary is because God makes us enjoy it, or the reason that you can use that for any argument.
I think you need to talk to the Pope, Dan.
Wait, Don, did you come up with the first one?
Yes.
You should have been on this committee.
I think Don was a theologian in a past life.
I know what they want to hear.
Theologian in a past life, screenwriter in a second life.
So, dear listener, if you have some arguments on why or why not gluttony should be a sin, you could tell us all about them. Trevor, where could they do that?
Oh, it just went out of his head.
Well, I just suddenly doubted everything I know about this section of the podcast. We're on Twitter and Facebook We're on Twitter and Instagram as at Big Fat Gay Pod. We're on Facebook as the Big Fat Gay Podcast. Leave us 5 stars there. Leave us 5 stars on your preferred podcast platform. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/BigFatGayPod. See the articles we talked about at www.bigfatgaypod.com, baby.
You see what happens when Trevor doesn't eat enough.
Yeah. My stomach's growling because our sandwiches are coming.
Yeah.
And maybe you're delivering our sandwiches.
Oh, in that car.
You're gently placing our sandwiches outside, and you're pulling out your phone to take a picture to prove you delivered them. But we're hungry, so watch out, baby.